Humphrey Hawksley, welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
It's great to see you, Kino. How are you down there in South Africa?
Doing good. Doing good.
That's good. God
Yeah. I mean, before we could come onto the show, you asked me how's things in South Africa, and I was completely honest and transparent about the question, mentioning that I do not sugarcoat anything. Politically, it's a mess. Socially, it's a mess. People are just fighting and disputing with each other all the time, each and every single day. And I just can't make sense of it. What's the reasoning behind it? Because we're so driven by emotions these days that we just can't come to common ground as humans. And it's sad, it's sad. But then you also mentioned we see this happening all around the world.
Well, I think let us have a rule for our conversation, which I'm really going to enjoy, a non-sugar-coated conversation on both sides.
Yeah. 100%.
I mean, with all things, including, with South Africa, you have that era of hope, don't you? And which happened with South Africa probably before you were born. And then you have that era of hope. And we had it here in Europe with the fall of the Berlin Wall. And everybody thought that our system was going to be the system of the world. And now, what is it, 30 years later or 40 years later, we all realize that the human condition sets in. And people are people. And the small minnows like you and I can do very little about it.
Yeah, we can only do our best to mention certain concerns on a podcast as an example. But it's up to people to actually listen, take it in, reflect on it, and actually make a change in their community. But people are stubborn, people are stubborn. So, yeah, I mean, it is what it is. So you coming to us from London? Nice.
London, yes, London, where it's winter here, but and dark evenings. I hope you can see me in enough light. But London, talking about what you just said at the beginning there, our politics here too have got vested interests, short-termism following it. So we have a prime minister who's been in power now for just over a year or so, and everybody wants to get rid of him. As if there's somebody else there that's going to be any better, that's going to come in and do anything else. No, all we want to have is, let's get rid of this person, let's get rid of that person, let's get rid of this, let's get rid of that, without any thought about the amount of time it takes to build the institutions that can make a government that gives citizens everything we want. We've got that here now with your listeners would have heard of Jeffrey Epstein and our former Prince Andrew, who's no longer Prince Andrew, and our former ambassador to the United States, Peter Mandelson, who's now today, in the center of a thing. And just let me run this by you, Kino. This Jeffrey Epstein thing, I'm sure you're it's all getting down there. I mean, this was a powerful man who, sexual predator, pedophile, whatever you want to call him. But isn't it right, or should we not think that in every community, in every society, there are people like that are getting away with that sort of thing all the time? What's it like in South Africa?
Yeah. No, I believe in that. It's true. It's happening all the time. When it comes to Jeffrey, I'm just going to call him by his first name there. When it comes to him, there's so many hidden secrets. There's another podcast I do follow. It's called The Diary of a CEO. It's something I advise you haven't heard of it. You have to look at it.
Who's the guy? Who's the guy that does it? It's a really podcast.
Yeah, it's also from the UK. Yeah, he's also from the UK. It's Stephen Bartlett. Can't get the surname right. Anyway, so he had a guy who was part of the CIA, and a long time ago, the gentleman now that was on the show, he exposed the CIA because of their torture programs. Anyway, for listeners, the CIA is a powerful organization. And he got arrested. He was sent to prison because he exposed them. Now that he's out of prison, he's getting onto podcasts, which is completely decentralized, and that's what I love about it. And he mentioned something about Jeffrey uh, that made me think, because he says he was actually a spy for the CIA. So of course, he can't mention too much details around it, but apparently he was a spy for the CIA. So for me, it's like, we will really never know the full extent of the truth of the story. You get all these names that are mentioned, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, but what really comes of it? There's this whole investigation and hype around it. But what's really going to come about it? Because the people in power are not really going to get convicted. I know I'm not answering your question, but this is just like, something extra to add to it, more spice to add to it. But I agree with you, it's happening all over South Africa, the UK, America. There's plenty of guys like him all over the show.
And
And I
so I was going to
just
say,
to say one more thing.
in every community, in every village, there's a powerful person that's abusing their power. And
Yeah.
quite often that turns into sexual predatory, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. No, 100%. And I also feel that, these guys that are exposed publicly are also puppets. There's guys above them, my opinion on it. There's guys above them that are running the whole show. So, I mean, you catch like a drug dealer out and you think, and this guy probably has like, a huge reputation with the FBI, for example, but there's someone above him, and that someone above him, you will never find him.
Did you ever see that movie with Daniel Craig called Layer Cake?
No.
And it was about a small, it was a sort of a small crime in happened in London, and then it gets a bigger crime and a body's found in a freezer. And at each section of the film, you meet the person that's in charge of the person below, and then you never meet the top person. And that's why it's called layer cake, because each of these things has a layer to it, and the guy at the top
Right.
never really gets found out or held accountable.
I will definitely look for that. Where Layer Cake, is it on Netflix or
It would be if you Google where you can find it, Prime or Netflix or something like that. Yeah, it's
cool? Yeah, I would love to check that out. Yeah, when it comes to the world, there's so many topics you can talk about, and any topic that you actually choose, it's a never-ending conversation, right? And I mean, let's jump onto that. I mean, let's talk about you first, like where it all started for you, leading up to BBC. A correspondent at the BBC. Are you still at the BBC?
No, I left the BBC. I still work as a journalist, and I write books, and I do things like you're doing. I moderate shows. In fact, I moderate a show twice a month called the Democracy Forum, and in that show, we have 2 or 3, 4 experts there that drill down on topics. So we had regulating artificial intelligence. Then the one before that was about critical minerals, which is what the whole world is about now. We've done conflict minerals, which a lot of that's in the Congo and stuff like that. And I started life after I left school. For a short period of time, I joined the Merchant Navy and worked on on an iron ore ship that landed me in Australia about 3 months later. And that gave me a taste. I must have had it already, because I wouldn't have done that unless I got on that ship, because I went to Angola, I went to Japan, and we went to various places that gave me a taste of travel. And it was during my time there, sort of working on jobs, laying cables, building boats, whatever, working in mines and that sort of thing as a teenager, that gave me a real taste of curiosity of people and of places. And I remember it was way back in 1975, 74, 75, there was a cyclone, and I was up in the northern town of Darwin, which is in northern Australia, a fairly remote town, and the cyclone came through. It was called Cyclone Tracy, and it tore the whole town apart completely. All the houses were just flattened. A number of people died, and I was there, and I decided to stay and help rebuild the town. And the press flew in, and they were interviewing people and that. And I thought, this is an interesting job, isn't it? You know, you fly into a place, disaster, you interview people, you drink a few beers, have a good time, then you go back and fly into the next one, and you get your name in the paper. So when I got back to London after that, I went through the whole of Asia on land and got back to London. I started applying for jobs to become a journalist. And some of them were pretty bad jobs. Some of them were really fascinating jobs. And I did that, and I actually went back to Australia, and I worked in Hong Kong, and then I came back to London and joined the BBC. And I was there in the newsroom of the BBC for 2 or 3 years. And then I got a first posting overseas in Sri Lanka to cover the civil war that was going on there. And from then, for about 30 years, I was what they call a foreign correspondent. And I did, I think up until 97-ish, I did a lot of Asia. So I was posted in Colombo, in Delhi, in India, Manila in the Philippines when they had their people power revolution, Beijing and Hong Kong. Then back in London, a lot of the Middle East we did with the war on terror and that, and a lot of Washington at that time. And then in between that, I did a fair amount from Africa, actually. We did, and they were sort of topic things, a lot of stuff in West Africa, a lot of stuff in Kenya, Uganda, and all that. And these were more issue-based things. Much of it was to do conflict minerals we did, the supply chains we did, human rights in the supply chains and that sort of thing. We'd fly in and do a film.
Yeah, sure. You have been all over. Okay?
You can ask me anything you want, because we're having what did you say? No souls bad or something conversation. So ask me anything you want. We'll go through.
Being to all this place, being a foreign correspondent, I mean, from a safety point, what was it safe for you? Covering all this?
It became safer up until the Bosnia War, and that was in the early 90s. Foreign correspondents had there was no real safety regulations or anything like that. So you would fly into a place, but at that time, journalists weren't particularly targeted. So you could go into a tribal fight or something like that, or a civil war, and you wouldn't be targeted. The two sides would be. That changed in the early 90s. And the Bosnia War, which was the breakup of Yugoslavia, that was when the BBC and other people first started giving us flak jackets, so bulletproof jackets, getting armored vehicles that you could travel around with and have some protection. And we also had what they call hostile environment courses, which would last on the inside of a week. And that would include first aid, which was very big, how to identify a road with landmines on it, how to escape, how to know where gunfire was coming from, where to take cover if there was gunfire. Key things that still stay with me now is that if you're trying to, if gunfire suddenly breaks out and you're in a place, a brick wall's not going to really protect you at all, but a tree will. So an earth will, but a high velocity round will go straight through a brick wall and into you. And one other thing, Kino, that I remember, and I still use it every day now, that if you're in a car, always be able to see the tires of touching the ground of the car in front of you, because that means you can get out. you can turn and get out. If you're too close to them and you can't see that, you won't be able to get out. So there were all sorts of stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And throughout your journeys, did you have a family?
Yeah. So that's you gets used to it. You know, you can you're away. When you have things like Iraq or that sort of thing, you do it, or Bosnia, you did it on rotation. So you knew you would be away for 3 weeks or 5 weeks in Iraq, and then you would come back. And if you have a disaster story, you would go very suddenly to that story. The phone would ring in the middle of the night, and you would be on the early morning plane. But the way the news works, you would only be there for the inside of a week, and then it would drop from the headlines, and you would be pulled out. So it is, you know, it's one of those, and you are at the mercy of the news for a long time, and that means that your social life falls apart because you can never commit to anything in case you get
Yep.
called off to do another event.
Yeah, yeah, no, 100%. So let's talk about journalism and the news, because a lot in this day and age, a lot of credibility has been lost. With any mainstream news outlet, like a lot of credibility, day by day, it's getting lost. And then we also live in the era of social media where there's also a lot of fake news that's going on. So, how is that affected? I mean, you must have still like a passion for journalism, but journalism back when you started versus now, definitely there's a major change. If you reported of what was going on in Iraq, for example, those days, there was credibility behind it. BBC had credibility. These days, if it happens, not so much. And then you go on to social media, there's about 200 different opinions on really what happened in Iraq.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. There's been this progression of technology overtaking what I call political leadership. So, and this started, I think, I'll take you right back many, many centuries. So when William Caxton invented the printing press, after that, Martin Luther, who started the Reformation in Europe, pinned to the door of Wittenberg Church his theses, they're calling it, was complaints against the Catholic Church. And they got redistributed around Europe, and that sparked off the Reformation against the Catholic Church. When we have this discussion about technology, I always refer back to this because without the printing press, there would not have been a Reformation. And I think many of your listeners would understand that this was the schism between Catholicism and Protestantism, and those were the wars that wrought through Europe for centuries after that, and still are to a certain extent. So when we get to the present day, I advocate that we need to be smart enough to be ahead of the technology. And so far, our political leaders have not done that. So what has happened essentially is that maybe 20 or 30 years ago, what's called the 24-hour news cycle began, which meant that prime ministers and politicians were expected to react within a few hours to something. It didn't give them enough time to think. If you're thinking through a long-term policy, say a long-term policy for the economic things of South Africa or anything, you need time to sort of think about that and where it's going and what your values are for it. It didn't give them enough time to do it, but the politicians weren't smart enough to work a way around that. And then, as you mentioned, you couple that with social media, which has maybe been around, say, for the last 10 years. And this is where we are now getting our news from a myriad of different sources. And a lot of those sources are not are more compelling, more, draw you in more than the mainstream news. And if you couple that with our political system, you have a similar system in South Africa that we have here, that you would have a prime minister or president that says something, and then immediately the opposition leader will say that what that person is saying is not correct and it's absolute rubbish.
Yeah.
And then as a civilian with that, you say, well, hold on, who do I believe at all in this world? Where is my anchor? When Nelson Mandela was there, or Churchill was there, or Mahatma Gandhi was there, or Ho Chi Minh, we had an anchor, or those people had an anchor of their leader and their leader's values. But now, whoever our leader is, somebody is trying to get rid of him and telling us that he's talking complete, or he or she is talking complete and utter rubbish. And I think that is something that as a society, we have not yet got our heads around on how to deal with it.
And that's an ambitious goal, to get our heads around that.
You're smart enough, Kina. You could get your head around it, couldn't you?
Yeah, but now we're talking about, just me, just you. But you look at the millions of people out there in the world and you do your best. I walk onto the road, I check to the community. They will be like, yeah, it'll go in 1 year, go out the other year. Tomorrow, here we are.
Yeah.
The same disputes. No, my political leader is right. No, my political leader is right. Next thing you know, there's this huge strike that's going on, and they're fighting and killing each other. And just complete drama, which raises so many questions about democracy.
Yeah.
Like, is this how democracy is always going to be? Because we will never find common ground. I don't even know how many political parties there are in South Africa anymore. The list just keeps growing, right? Let's move over to, America: conservative, liberal, blue, red, completely divided. Where are we going, in your honest opinion? Like, where are we going?
I think that what has happened is that the democratic mechanics of democracy, and let us assume that democracy is a definition of the best and most accountable form of government that will deliver prosperity and security and wealth to the nation and the people. And that's the purpose of it. Let's just assume that that's the purpose of it. And that purpose works because everybody's given a voice and it goes through a trusted system and delivers a government. I think what has happened in the past 20 years or so is that the mechanics of those democratic systems, whether it's in South Africa, the US, or Britain, hasn't kept up with society's mindset and the technology. And so therefore we have a situation that you just mentioned in South Africa. You said that everybody's got their own things and all these political parties. Well, you can't govern if you have 200 political parties all telling us that something's wrong. You cannot build a bridge and you can't set up a school because they'll argue about the curriculum. So you just, here in Britain, we had a vote that took us out of the European Union. We had a series of so-called populist, charismatic prime ministers, but they were unable to govern, and they kept getting thrown out. We now have a rather drab, boring prime minister who's the least charismatic person, and they want to get rid of him. So, and over in the States, I won't, the democratic system has delivered a president back in 2018 who everybody knew was a little bit off the wall and that was not an aberration, because the same man was delivered back into office last year and is now turning the world order upside down. So this is what democracy has delivered. And what hasn't, in the West, we haven't modernized it and kept track of the Twitter and or X and social media impact and the constant arguments that are going. We haven't. In the developing world or the global South, the democratic system of the one person, one vote has been injected into societies before the institutions have been built that can manage it. And this is a very, in order to run, to manage a fair and accountable place where you don't have discrimination, where people are treated equally and wealth is distributed fairly well, you need to have very strong institutions. You need to have a police force that is neutral, a military that is neutral, a fire brigade that will turn up, at anybody's house, not just a rich person's house. You need to have an electoral commission. You need to have regulators that regulate the electricity and the water, and all of those things need to run properly. And then when you vote in a particular government and a particular president, he or she will become the leader, but nothing else will change. What has happened in the developing world is that we in the West, not me personally, but in the West, have gone into Iraq or Syria or something and just said, okay, right, so you do this. And if you just think about it, Kino, if you've had a country that's had tension and war and all that sort of thing, and you bring the United Nations in to have peace, and these people's instinct to solve a problem, which you just referred to, is to kill somebody, you kill somebody you disagree with, and then you put them in opposite sides of a legislature or a parliament and have them shouting at each other instead, it's not going to work, is it? And that's what you've had. If you look at Liberia, these are places, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Ivory Coast. These are places I've all sort of worked at. Kenya's had its problems too. And then if you look at the Middle East, it's all over the place. And the one of the countries that does keep going is Uganda. They just had an election. Museveni, who's been in for 2,000 years, is still the guy in there. The country's not great. It holds together. So there's been an inability to find a midway between this instant democracy and the slow, gradual building of institutions that produces a fair government. You agree or disagree?
No, I agree. I agree with all that you have just said. The thing is...
And that must be dull for your listeners.
Sorry?
I said that must be dull for your listeners if we agree with each other.
No, I mean, everybody is involved in politics some way or the other. It's not like a niche that I focus on a lot, but there is a period where, you just have a conversation, especially if I'm talking to someone such as yourself, that comes from such a background and actually has, a better politically understanding about the world than myself and the listeners, because now it's knowledge for all of us. And we need to make a decision in our individual capacity. Okay, this is what's happening at the macro now. I'm in the micro. How am I going to go about my life? Because growing up and even into my early 20s, I was into politics. I kept my eye on the ball. I wanted to see what was happening. I would watch the BBC, I would watch CNN, Of course, it was always all negative news, this is happening, they're fighting here, there's been a bomb here, this person died, but I guess that's just how, news is, right? And after a while, I started to realize, and once again, I mentioned this earlier, I self-reflected. I'm like, what good does it do for me as a person listening to these politicians, paying so much attention to all the negativity in the world? What good is it actually doing to me? Because I'm passionate about ABC, I want change to happen here, there, everywhere. And I'm like, I feel they're not going to do anything about it. So I need to do something about it. So I started my own foundation. I had no funding, but whatever little I could do, I did it. Right? I went in. I started a podcast. I started talking about these topics, not on this specific show, but there's another show that I co-host with an author who's based in Canada called Creating Team Human. And after this show is uploaded, I will send it to him. And yeah, I would love to have you come onto that show as well. And the mandate of that show is to eliminate tribalism because we're just too divided as a world. Not realizing that we're all humans and we just need to learn to get along. But the problem is we're so emotionally driven, by what politicians are saying. And that's just the nature of the game, right? If I'm a politician, I tap into your emotions, I win you over, without you even thinking about it. I no longer need to explain any logic to you anymore. Guys, that's the world we live in. I just need to tap into your emotions. And once I've got your emotions, and we saw this happen with Donald Trump a lot. Once I tap into your emotions, I've got you. I've got you because I know that you are driven by emotion and there's so much fire going on there. So if I mention that one thing that you are unhappy about, boom, I got you.
Yeah.
Even though it's not backed up by no strategy, no policy, nothing, but I got you.
You've nailed it in one. You hit the sweet spot of anger, and you're away. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, all the guests that come onto the podcast, and us who do host podcasts, it's completely decentralized. There's no red tape like your mainstream news outlets or radio stations. So, and it's a growing market. So now we can talk about what we want. And I am not biased about anything. I've spoken to Democrats, I've spoken to Republicans, I've heard their cries, and I try to relate to both of them, That's the type of person I am, because by me doing that, I'm saying, guys, let's just have a conversation about it. Let's not fight about it. Let's not kill each other over it. Let's not riot about it. Let's talk about it. What's up? Let's come to common ground. Not easy, but worth a shot.
And no, you're right. You have to change mindsets, though. I think less people in today's world are willing to accept another person's point of view, and sort of say, "Oh, okay, you might be right about that," and it happens less and less. And I think that is a part of the social media, because they're convinced in their silos that they're in that they're right and they have support. So if I'm talking to them, they're going to sort of hear me, they're going to counter me, they're going to cancel me, and then they go back to the comfort zone.
Yeah, no, 100%. And just to conclude, on this, I mean, we could continue for hours, on these topics.
You'll lose listeners if you do that.
Sorry?
You'll lose listeners if you do that. You could
what we've been speaking about, it's not only in politics, it also happens in religion as well, as another example, how divided religion actually is, it's crazy. It's crazy what's happening out there. But we can only be optimistic, be optimistic about it.
Yeah.
So Humphrey, let's jump on to your writing career. You come from this journalist background, working for such a huge outlet, organization, BBC, into writing books. How did that jump happen? And then let's talk about, your series.
The jump happened because they were simultaneous. They kept going. So I was writing. Well, the first book I wrote was when I was the Beijing bureau chief, and it was commissioned by an editor who I'd offered him a sort of rather boring With a China book, and I had all the nonfiction book. And I went in to see him with my agent, and he was sitting at his publisher's desk, and he had this in front of him, printed out on a piece of paper, and the wind came through the window and sort of took it off his desk. And he didn't go and pick it up or anything like that. I thought, what's going on here? And he said, this is all very well, Humphrey. I could publish this book and you might get 1,000 or 2,000 sales. But what would it take, or would you be able to write me a book about America going to war with China? And I, being a hack reporter, said, yeah, I could do that. So we did. So I did a book called Dragon Strike. This is way back. This was in 97 or 97, I think. And I did 3 what we call future history military political things. And one of them was a very detailed, researched book, but written as a thriller about China and America at war in Asia. The other one was about Pakistan, India, and China at war in South Asia and China. And the last one I called Third World War, which was where all the issues that we read about today come together, and there's a war against everybody. And what fascinates me, because this was called, and that was the Third World War, and that last one was written in 2003, I think. And what fascinates me, Kino, more than anything, is that the issues that we're talking about now, with Russia invading Europe, Trump invading Greenland, China on the rise, Africa, wars, and then there's in the Sahel, particularly where Russia's come in and taken a lot of the stuff that used to be French or is getting control there. All of that stuff, those issues have not gone away, and that countries remain pretty much as countries are. So Russia remains like Russia, whether it had Putin or not, it would be Russia. India would be India. Britain is in Britain. The US is the US. And so I look at and I've just actually they've just been reissued with new covers, because a lot of the experts look at it and say, you go back and read Humphrey Hawksley's Third World War, and you can see why we are at this level now with of tension between countries. And I think, including that, we talked about democracy and everything, is that over the past 20 or 30 years, there hasn't been an initiative to reform the world order. So China, which is now the second biggest economy in the world, its voting rights, say, on the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, is minuscule compared to its power. The United Nations Security Council, those are the 5 victors, ostensible victors of the Second World War. Well, what are they still doing there? And then in opposition to that, you've got things like the BRICS, of which South Africa is a member. You've got Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa as sort of forging another group, which will take years to do. And why are they doing it? Because they feel they're being left off the top table of the world order. And I think when you talk about, we talked about, the politicians not being able to get ahead of technology. Whoever runs the world hasn't been able to get ahead of the growing voices from the global South, that South Africa is not the country that it was in 1945, and nor is Nigeria, and nor is Brazil, nor is China. Yet the structures that run the world have not been reformed a nano-inch in order to take in this new reality. And it's almost, this is it's almost like, when giving the vote to, we didn't give the vote to women until 1922, or denying the vote to some sort of certain section of society. This section of society needs a big place in the global order. And the present one at the moment, which is being threatened and could fall apart tomorrow if war breaks out, hasn't been reformed. And that it would be negligence, I don't know what you call it, of the people that are running the world.
Yeah. So this was all that you just mentioned now. Is this what we can expect in your books?
In the actual book that I put up there, the Rake Ozenna series, about 6 months ago, I republished the Future History series that I was just talking about. What has been republished now is the Rake Ozenna series, which is fiction. It's fictional thrillers, but it concentrates on the Arctic. And the guy that's the hero, Rake Ozenna, he comes from an island on the US-Russian border. Now, I doubt many of your listeners would know this because I didn't before I started doing it. But, Russia and America are these two hostile nuclear superpowers, right? Everybody can agree with that. And we keep fighting in Europe or wherever. But actually, they have two islands in the Bering Strait, which runs between Alaska and Siberia, two islands. One is called Little Diomede, and the other one is called Big Diomede, after a Greek explorer that went there years ago. And these islands are 2.5 miles apart. So if you are a native Alaskan living on Little Diomede Island, which has got only 80 people on it, you get up every morning and you look across and you see a Russian military base. I went there for a reporting trip for the BBC. It's getting on for 10 years ago now. And I looked at this and I thought, what would happen if Russia came across and took this island? And that was when tension wasn't as bad as it is now. And that became the first Rake Ozenna book that was called Man on Ice. And I just thought it would be something that I whipped off, and then I went off to do my day job again. But I've written 4 of them up until now. There was the Russian border. We did one in Japan. I did one in Japan, one on the Norway-Russian border. And all of them are deeply sort of enmeshed in the sort of politics we've been talking about, the mechanics of those politics, of how countries work towards each other, with one guy on the ground, because it's the guys on the ground that actually make the difference. The SEAL forces or the Delta forces that go in and make the difference. You can do whatever you want. And I've just finished another one that'll be out in September, which coincidentally is about America wanting to take Greenland. And that was a big issue, as you know, a couple of weeks ago. It might have died now. It'll come back. And I signed to do that book back in the summer. It turns out that it was pretty much on the nail of what the US wanted to do, splitting NATO and all of that sort of stuff. So that's my series at the moment that I'm working on.
So this is a mixture of fiction and non-fiction.
Yeah, in a way, what I've failed to do, for anybody out there that's looking to write books or wants to write books, is that I'm a journalist. So the first thing I'm going to tell you, Kino, is that a bullet has gone across the room. That's the thing. It's a fact of that. But what a novelist has to do is build character, build atmosphere of place, and hold back the reveal of the news. So that bullet going across the room is going to be way down after the reader has got to love you and got to love me and got to love my bookcase and your bookcase, and then you can do the facts. So I have never successfully done that, because I keep saying to myself, well, this is important, or this is that Russia does something, but actually the reader might not be interested in that. What they're interested in is which girl is the hero going to go off with, or is that relationship going to break up? So I have to bring myself around to do that. But I think, at my stage, I quite enjoy that, because I have to be taken off this sort of news junkie thing and go back to find the human condition.
Yeah, 100%. And how do you know when this series is supposed to end? Or will there ever be an ending? Because clearly it's doing well if you've written so many already.
I don't think I wouldn't want it to end yet. I mean, what's interesting about this is that when the first Rake Ozenna came out, I think it was 2018 or 2019, the Mail on Sunday, which is one of our local papers, it says that I think it was Hawksley's excellent idea was to move the thriller location from Europe to the Arctic. And at that time, nobody was really talking about the Arctic. It was an off-piste, one would say. But now the Arctic has become a sort of global focus, partly because of Trump and Greenland and everything like that. And the ice is melting and Russia's building more military bases there and all that sort of thing. So I suspect that the Rake Ozenna character will keep going for some time. And I might, if I get too old or too tired, I might sort of put the friend, give it to someone else to. Lee Child has just retired and gave it to his brother to write the Jack Reacher series. So,
Is it not?
and Mark Cameron, who's a great writer who lives in Alaska, and I saw him when I was there the other day. He wrote Tom Clancy for some time. So, I don't have to always write Rake Ozenna, but I think that he's a character that he's fairly unique in a way because he's a native Alaskan. And I don't think in fiction you've got that sort of character. He's a native Alaskan who joined the Alaska National Guard, which is the sort of grunt force there, but he broke through to be an officer and then got seconded to Special Forces operations. And strangely, I was in Fairbanks, Alaska, a month or so ago, which is, in the heart of Alaska, minus 18 or something. And I was talking to somebody at the university there who was, they have a big research center there for the Arctic and for the environment and everything. And he said, I was saying basically what I just said to you about Rakers, and he said, you should meet Sam. And I said, who's Sam? He said, well, Sam's your protagonist. And Sam, I said, what? He said, yeah. He said, Sam is a Special Forces, native Alaskan. He's a colleague of mine at the university. Here's his phone number. I called Sam. Sam came out for a cup of coffee. We spent 2 hours together. And he told me some fascinating things. And one of them, he told me, was interesting. To me, it was interesting. Because he served in Iraq and Afghanistan and that sort of thing. I said to him, what was different in the way you viewed a hostile environment around you compared to your colleagues in your unit? And he said, I could read the faces of the people. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, firstly, I was born and brought up in a very small community where we hunted and we trapped. So we knew environments, we knew how to test that. But secondly, he said, you can tell the faces of a community that feels it is being occupied. And that face will change because it knows that there's a higher control and it might not be a good control and you have no power over it. And he was talking about growing up in a native village in America as an American Indian and having this higher power there. And talking to you just, I think that your father or grandfather or going back would relate to that, wouldn't they?
Yeah. Wow, Humphrey, you are quite an interesting individual.
And so I love you. Can we go and have a coffee in Johannesburg or something when I drop down?
Yeah. Wow. This is mind-blowing, like your interaction with just everything around the world and how it just fits into your books. In your press release, I saw another book that was called Third World War.
Yes, the Third World War was part of the what we call the Future History series, and that was the one I was talking about earlier, where Russia, China, the US, and Europe, I think it was, all moved towards a war that couldn't be prevented. And the leaders of all those nations were reasonable people who wanted to stop the war. But they knew that if they stopped it, there would be, something dreadful would happen and it wouldn't work, because that is what their nation was. And I think it's very interesting when you think about Ukraine and what Putin is doing, or China and what Xi is doing. And here in London, they're meant to be our enemies. But these nations have a long narrative. And once you push somebody into a corner, then you can have nothing but war. And I think right now we are moving closer to somebody being pushed into a corner. And I don't exclude the American administration from that, because they are as likely to start a war as anybody else, as we know from the background. And they have a thing called the atomic clock. And I think it's Federation Nuclear Scientists, every so often, they have a hand that gets close to midnight. And the closer it is to midnight, the more likelihood there is of being a nuclear war. And it started, I think, back in the 1960s or something. Right now, it is the closest it has ever been to a nuclear war, even during the Cold War. So it's not just me sort of worried about this.
Yeah.
And as a young man, Kino, you should be more worried than me, because you've got your future ahead of you.
But yeah, but when I observe the world, Third World War, I feel, has already taken off. Some disagree. Of course, they would disagree, saying that we haven't gotten there yet. But I don't know, when I connect the dots with all that's happening, not only with disputes, but also what's happening with the global financial system,
Right.
we clearly see that we are moving away, from paper money, paperless system. We are definitely moving away from that to a complete digital controlled system.
Yes.
Now, in order for that to happen, the powers of the world first have to cause the problem, as the saying goes. Let the chaos happen, and hey, guys, look, we got the solution. So that is coming. We see all the top dogs of the world, not only in government, but also the private sector, talking about it. For example, BlackRock. They've already mentioned it, how we are tokenizing assets. Your house will be an asset. Your car will be an asset. Stocks will be an asset. You will own nothing and you will be happy, right? Now, when I talk about this to people, they're like, this is fiction. This can never happen. But because you're not paying attention to how the world is evolving and the whole 2030 agenda, that's in play at the moment, they are talking about, universal basic income. Everyone is talking about it, depending which podcast you listen to. And I'm talking about podcasts that have a lot of credibility. It's there, it's getting mentioned. But this, you see, once again, my opinion, the powers of the world just has to cause enough distractions that you don't actually see what's happening and where the world is going. So,
And what's the Third World War doesn't deal with digital currency. What do you see as the big danger of digital finance?
Digital finance is complete control. It's complete control. Okay, let's talk about by the government. By the government. Because if you look at universal basic, any government. But I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist here, but as I say, I just connect the dots and then I try to make sense of it all. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that does make sense to me because I've looked here, and here. I believe all the governments are aligned with each other. In all the international disputes that we see happening around the world, for me, is just all pre-planned by higher powers above the presidents of the world, right? I feel organizations such as BlackRock control the government, more than the government actually controls itself. So there's this global agenda, and we just need to cause distractions in order to enter the next industrial revolution. So we look at universal basic income, right? We look at how AI is evolving, how AI is taking over jobs. So you're going to have millions and millions of jobs that are going to be lost. It's coming, it's happening. You cannot stop this. It's going to happen. You can resist it, but you can't stop it. So get on board now, familiarize yourself, start a business, start a company, whatever it may be. Get involved, have something that you can say you can have for yourself, leverage from, because if you don't, you're going to lose your job. And it's not like the government is just going to leave you there, high and dry with no income. So 101 universal basic income is this. I am going to allocate you as the government $2,000 a month, digital currency. Of that $2,000 a month, you're going to pay for ABC. Come the end of the month, if there is $200 that is left, that $200 is not going into your savings account. That is going back to the government. And then you are going to be allocated another $2,000. So that is ideally how universal basic income is going to work. So no freedom when it comes to money, how you spend money, how you save money, nothing of the sort.
So you have a solution.
My solution.
You do. Greg, you have a you've identified a problem and you've come up with a way through, and whether that way through is right or not, that experts can work on that. But the solution that you have needs to get to the top table of government. I mean, one thing, just because we're running out of time, I'll just say, is that we have the democracy, we have the freedom of speech, we have everything like that. But the big issues.
Freedom of speech. I don't think we have freedom of speech anymore.
Whatever. Yeah, we have a little bit. You and I are having what was that phrase you used, Kino, at the beginning? No salt in the wounds or something that this conversation would have. But I think the point is this, is that when you look at the big decisions that are being made, it's basically 2 or 3 people in a room. And those 2 or 3 people that decide on going to war or, pulling some financial thing or solving some financial thing, they wouldn't have read the reams and reams of think tank reports and university research and all of that sort of thing. They'll just go on whether they've got the votes to do it or enough guns to do it, and whether it suits their political agenda.
Yeah. Couldn't have said that better. The thing is, and I mean, you have to be really, really, really brainless to not realize this. But we're not living, people thought COVID happened, and after COVID, we were going to get back to normal, like how life was in 2018 and 2019. It's not the case. COVID was like a starting point. It was a starting point. And we're just going to see so many things happening from now until 2030. And the people that are asleep are going to wake up one day and be like, what happened here? How did this happen? Like,
I wonder
what happened? Yeah. I wonder what happened here. So, solutions, I mean, everybody has, different solutions. Accumulate this much of wealth if you can by this time. But even if you do accumulate this amount of wealth by that time, now it brings up the question again about how free are you? It's like this house, right? I own this house. Do I really own it? I mean, I pay tax on it, but do I really own it? Because the government can come tomorrow with the military and kick me out of this house if they wanted to. What would I do about it? What can I do about it? You know?
Mhm.
So, accumulate as much wealth as you can. Yeah, but I mean, where exactly are you storing the wealth? Okay, crypto, it's decentralized. Yeah, but decentralized for how long,
Yeah.
right? So, I don't know. So, for all I'm doing right now with my life is I'm just continuing to build my brand, my platform, have these conversations. I want creators, which is what the Kino as a podcast is about versus the other two, to be able to live their best lives possible. And my message has always been since day one is that nobody is coming to save you. Your priest is not coming to save you. The Pope is not coming to save you.
Mm.
Donald Trump is not coming to save you. Cyril
Mm.
Ramaphosa in South Africa is not coming to save you. The Prime Minister in the UK is not coming to save you. The only person that can save you is yourself. So if you want to be an author, if you want to be a musician, get going, do it yourself. And if you don't know how, you reach out to Kino, and if I don't know how, I'm going to be like, okay, I do know somebody who can assist us with this part of the process. Let's get them on board, you know, and we get going, not be threatened about what's happening around the world because you're watching too much TV, in my honest opinion, or threatened about AI, get going, do what you need to do for yourself. Stop waiting for better days. And I want to mention this about South Africa, right? And maybe, the UK as well. Yeah, possibly also the UK. And we see it happening a lot in the US as well. And I have so many associates there. Is millions of people are still sitting back, relaxing, feeling entitled because of what happened before 1994, going back to apartheid days, still living in this entitlement world of theirs, that no, the ANC is coming to save me, they are on the way, they are going to take care of me. I am here to say to all those people, it is not happening. It is not happening. If you look at all the rural areas in South Africa, if you look at all the underdeveloped areas in South Africa, if you looked at the schools or government schools in South Africa that don't even have water and electricity, if we look at the hospitals, government run hospitals in South Africa that don't even have water, electricity, medication, proper medical care, where you walk into these hospitals and you see people lying on the floor because there's no room for them and there's nobody to attend to them, and you're waiting 10 hours, being in a car accident, bleeding. So you still think that they are coming to save you? No, they're not. You need to save yourself. You need to do things for yourself if you are ever going to make progress. Just by the way, just to conclude, I can talk a lot, when I touch on certain topics. On the same podcast I want to invite you on, which is called Creating Team Human, we had the honor and privilege to interview students from Afghanistan, right? Afghanistan, however, people want to pronounce it, it's pronounced differently all over the world. And they've bypassed the Taliban government to get themselves educated. So I'm sure you're familiar with what's happening there and how women are getting suppressed. We've just
Mm.
gotten a latest update from our, contact in the country that women are now starting to disappear again off the streets.
Mm.
So these girls, with funding from organizations in the US and Canada, Malaysia, have managed to get in education. I mean, they are brilliant. For what they had to go through and how educated they are today, you would never ever say that they come from Afghanistan and come from a Taliban run government or country, right? And they're making their way out one by one. They're getting themselves educated. Few have already moved to other locations around the world, which are, I'm not going to mention on this show. But the effort that they have put in, and they have not lost faith in themselves, and they are continuing, the journey, not depending on the government, not playing victim, not waiting for a better government to come one day down the line. They've taken action. So that was a clear example to all that I've just said now. They've taken action for their life. If you hear their stories, you will be like heart sore, especially if you're coming from a first world country. I mean, South Africa is a third world country, but we still got to get it in them, when it comes to access to education and have the internet, right? So it's a wake up call, for the ones that are sitting back waiting for better days because they think somebody is coming to save me.
No,
you know.
Kino, I have to go now to my next thing, but it's been fascinating.
Yeah,
Thank
it's been a pleasure. Yeah. We will definitely continue this conversation on creating team women. Just before you go, where can listeners find you online?
Online, Google Humphrey Hawksley. The website is www.humphreyhawksley.com. So it's my name, which is up on the screen, and that will come up. And the series I'm doing, just Google Rake Ozenna. He's all on my website, but then he'll come up on his own right. And let me know. Just join my newsletter, which is there. Send me an email. Tell Kino that what I've been saying is a load of rubbish, and we can discuss it at some other time. And Kino, forward on the any thoughts that you have. I will answer them. I love debate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Humphrey, thank you so much. It's been an awesome pleasure being with you. And catch you later. I never say goodbye. I always say catch you later because, as I said, we will be chatting again soon.
I will catch you later. It's been illuminating and uplifting. So thanks. Thank you, Kino.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.